Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger from the Schiller Institute. Welcome to this week's Schiller Institute International webcast featuring our president and founder, Helga Zepp-LaRouche. Helga, in your New Year's greeting, you stated that this year there is reason for optimism because solutions do exist. What's necessary is that we mobilize to make sure these solutions are implemented. As we will discuss today, there have been very significant developments on a broad range of fronts, including the new exposures that promise the possibility of ending the Mueller investigation. There's the new opening between North and South Korea as a channel of communications was open. That's certainly promising, and continuing developments with the Belt and Road Initiative from China. But let's begin with the situation in the United States. Among the developments around the so-called Russiagate, there's a new book that came out called The Fire and the Fury, which just has the typical stink of a British smear job, but it's opened the door for an interesting backlash. So what do you make of this book and the developments around Russiagate?
Well, I think this book is, full of inaccuracies, lies, and, it had actually a very positive effect because it quotes Bannon, who had come out in the recent period very strongly anti-China, anti-Russia. And, so this was then these things which were said by Bannon, Trump took to basically send out tweets distancing himself from Bannon completely. And that has caused a complete storm. So all the media are full of the book, that the book is supposedly the big revelation about what's going on in the White House, that Trump dismissed Bannon in this way. But these are really sideshows. Something much, much more is going on, much more important is going on. And in the beginning, I would like all our viewers and listeners to absolutely make sure that you switch on your live stream connection to LPEC tomorrow, because there will be a truly important meeting conducted by the whistleblowers and VIP veterans of sane intelligence, VIPs, the VIPs representatives William Binney and Ray McGovern, and also Barbara Boyd, who is famous for having written the dossier on Robert Mueller. And they will reveal why all of these lies, are very dangerous and would potentially lead to war with Russia. But this meeting, of three, probably the best experts on the subject you can imagine, is coming in the context of the whole Russiagate falling apart. So while the mainstream media are still trying to change the subject by, focusing on this book and on the Bannon story, the real important story instead is what happened yesterday, where you remember that on the 28th of December, Congressman Nunes, who is the head of the House Intelligence Committee, had put an ultimatum to the FBI and to the Department of Justice to release all documents in relation to the activities involving the DOJ and the FBI in respect to the dossier of Christopher Steele, the so-called former MI6 agent, whose dossier was the reason, basically the ground on which this whole Russiagate story was founded. Now, this story is falling apart, and there was another absolutely desperate effort by the head and founder of the GPS Fusion firm, which is the firm which hired Christopher Steele in the first place, with an op-ed in the New York Times, trying to diffuse the whole story, saying what a heroic job they did in protecting the United States from, a terrible Russian onslaught in the campaign. And anyway, so this is all not working because, the truth is coming out. And, what happened yesterday is that the head of the FBI, Wray, and the Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein went to see Paul Ryan, and they discussed with him, obviously, the Nunes request, because shortly afterwards, Nunes released the story that he had an agreement in hand that in the next couple of days, all the documents would be released pertaining to this story. Now, I only believe it, when I actually see that these documents are really there, but he is now very confident that all the documents will be released. And, this is a breaking story because I'm absolutely certain that once these documents are in the hands of the House Intelligence Committee or the House Judiciary Committee, because Senator Grassley is involved in a similar investigation, then, this can boomerang. The real story here is not, that Russia was colluding or having collusion with the Trump regime, Trump administration. The real scandal is, which all these question marks lead to, if it turns out that the Obama administration colluded with British intelligence and the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC in order to prevent, to conspire against an opponent candidate, and then after he won the election against an elected president, that is a scandal which could totally dwarf the Watergate scandal. And this is now the breaking story. So don't be confused by what the main media are trying to sell you as the key story, because the true story is around Nunes and around Senator Grassley and what they are now pursuing.
And you made the point that there was a desperate attempt to cover this up by the two founders of Fusion GPS. In their statement, they essentially said that the work that they did proved there was Russian intervention, and they spoke in the op-ed as though there was actual proof that had been presented. But as Bill Binney and Ray McGovern and Barbara Boyd will present in their presentation, there's no proof that's been presented. And this is why the whole story is falling apart. Also, Helga, I think it's important that Paul Manafort, who is one of the people who was targeted by Mueller, has filed a civil action to have his case dropped because it's outside of the range of the special counsel's mandate. Now, in the midst of all this, we have the upcoming State of the Union address. We have new warnings on the financial crisis. Now, how does this play out? What's the potential? If Trump could be freed from this operation, what's the potential with the coming weeks on the economy?
Well, I think, the warnings of Roger Stone that the cabal, which is trying to get rid of Trump, will not give up, has to be taken very serious. Just now, I think 56 congressmen filed, or basically said they want to form a committee to see if they can pursue the 25th Amendment against Trump. And they're trotting out all kinds of psychiatrists who try to interpret the tweets of Trump, find some reasons that he's not fit for president. I mean, look, it looks quite different, because if Trump is freed of the Russiagate scandal, which is about to happen, if Trump is freed from the, populist whole scenario which Bannon was associated with, then, and he said that in his tweet, he said, I was elected by the forgotten men and women, and I'm going to answer them and not Bannon. So if these two choke points are removed from Trump, then the field is totally open, and there are now various conservative news blogs and others who demand that all of this idea that you create jobs with the tax reform and so forth, this all doesn't work. You need Glass-Steagall. So if even from the conservative Republican circles is coming now the demand for Glass-Steagall, this is very important. And our colleagues in the United States, the colleagues from LaRouche's, they are involved in a major campaign to distribute the 4 laws of Lyndon LaRouche, the first law being Glass-Steagall, and then go to a Hamiltonian credit system, and then the United States should join the new Silk Road. This is the campaign which, that's why I'm saying there are solutions, because it would be very easy once you have a clear perspective on going for a massive infrastructure program, and the big battle right now, as far as I can see, is in the Republican Party, where the neocons and the people close to Wall Street want to prevent that from happening and instead go with the idea of cutting entitlements and things like that. So the crucial battle is really, in the remaining, I think, 3 weeks until the State of the Union address occurs. So all people who are concerned, should really see, on the other side, you have this tremendous momentum of the new Silk Road. Even people who have been distant and warning against the new Silk Road, they're now saying, well, forget all reservations. This is the big game in town. It's the only show. It's the largest infrastructure program on the planet. And it is obvious that any country which does not work with the new Silk Road will be sidelined. There are tremendous strategic realignments going on right now. And as one former German ambassador to China just wrote in a long article in a German economic newspaper, that the people who are saying that the relationship of Europe to the United States or China would be a zero-sum game are completely wrong, because you can have both a very good relationship with the United States and with China. And those who have reservations obviously only project their own hegemonic intentions from the previous century onto China. And, this guy, Schäfer, is then saying he knows Xi Jinping personally from, previous years. And he is a totally calm, long person with a long vision, having an idea of a harmonious development. And people should just join. And there are more and more voices, of even, bankers who now say, no, this is the new game in town. So, if the United States can be brought to join with the new Silk Road, and Chinese investments in infrastructure in the United States can take place. China is a champion on this. They have now already 25,000 kilometers fast train. They are planning to have, I think, 35,000 until the year 2030. They will connect every major city in China through a fast train system. And why can that not be done in the United States? The United States is in bitter demand of a total renewal of infrastructure. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette just a couple of days ago had a very good article saying, the fact that the Atlanta airport, which is the largest hub for air traffic, closed down 11 hours because the electricity had a blackout because of old age. And that is the condition of most of the electricity installations in the United States, because the infrastructure in the United States is aging. It's 50, 60, 100 years old. Bridges, roads, all of this needs to be repaired. So this cannot be repaired or cannot be financed, if you stay within the rules of Wall Street. And therefore, the big battle is, how can we get President Trump to go to his election promise? Glass-Steagall, he talked about the American system of economy. He talked about Lincoln, Kerry, Alexander Hamilton. That is what we have to hopefully get on the agenda, and then all the problems can be solved.
Well, on that note, Helga, there's also this whole question of Lyndon LaRouche's 4 laws as the basis for this versus this fake economics from Wall Street. The president is, I think, mistakenly talking about the stock market as an indicator of the economy. You were talking earlier about the warnings coming out internationally with debt bubbles and financial crisis. It would seem that this would be the incentive, given this danger of a crash, to go back to these campaign promises, wouldn't it?
Yes. As the year is just starting, a lot of analysts from around the world, including from China, was warning of new black swans in the financial system. but also Nomi Prince and many other analysts, bankers from many countries are warning, that it's 100% certain that this system will crash. It's very difficult to say exactly will it crash at the beginning of this year or a little bit later, but the parameters are all much, much worse than 2008. The corporate debt bubble is much bigger. The indebtedness of the states, student loans, car loans, the real estate situation, it's all the parameters, and naturally the derivative exposure are about 1/3 to 1/2 larger than in 2008, with the difference is that all the so-called instruments of the central banks have been used up, and the only thing which is left is money pumping. And despite the fact that the inflation was not so visible except in the stock market, the hyperinflation is an absolute possibility. And the stock market, it's a bubble. People should not think that that is an indicator of the health of the economy. If you look at the jobs, how many people are not calculated in the labor statistics, the suicide rate, the drug epidemic, all of these are factors affecting the real economy, and that has not yet been addressed. So the big pressure is really to go for a real Roosevelt-style infrastructure project with the 4 laws of LaRouche, which involves a lot of physical science. It involves a crash program for fusion power, for space technology. And we need a real discussion about these matters very urgently in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
And this, of course, is something that the listeners can do something about by working to ensure that these issues are discussed, that we're not trapped in the fake economic reporting of the mainstream media. Now, the other, I think, significant development on the strategic side of things was the opening of communication between North Korea and South Korea. This is something that promises the possibility of moving out of this threat of nuclear confrontation. What do you know about this, Helga?
Well, I think it is a promising development because the dialogue has been started. It's not entirely clear on what level it will actually be conducted. But it's also, rumors are that the South Korea and the United States have suspended military training and drills during the time of the Olympics taking place in South Korea. And, it is a promising thing, because if the two Koreas talk to each other, the ice is broken. And I think Kim Jong-un is doing it from a position of strength, because he says North Korea is now a full-fledged nuclear power, so nobody can attack us without taking a terrible price for it. And this is because he looked at Saddam Hussein, at Gaddafi, and what was attempted against Assad, and that is why he pursued this way. So I think that if we get away from that kind of immediate danger of confrontation, and South Korea is resuming the sunshine policy of Kim Dae-jung, and that in the context of the new Silk Road, with the promises of Putin to help in the development of North Korea, if they are willing to denuclearize, China offering the Silk Road Corporation, I think we are entering a period where that problem can be brought under control. And I think this is very promising. And, I think the views of Nikki Haley, who says she doesn't care about the two Koreas talking, it's just completely wrong. It's a completely arrogant view, because, after all, it's the Korean Peninsula which is at stake, and the people living there. So I think it's a very, very good and promising development.
Well, and of course, Nikki Haley is tied to people like John Bolton and the same neocons who were responsible for the Iraq War and the chaos in the Middle East. Now, at the same time, though, we're seeing a potentially disturbing trend coming not so much out of Iran, but the commentary about Iran, that this may be a regime change underway. What do you know about this situation in Iran right now?
Well, I mean, it's a little bit too early to make a definite judgment. I mean, what seems to be clear is that the unrest erupted because some mullahs were caught in speculation, where people lost some investments in hedge funds, and people then quickly, that protest turned from being furious about having lost their savings into demanding a total change of the mullahs. And now basically there is a claim that the MEK was involved in it, pushed by Saudi Arabia. Now, the MEK was on the terrorist list until 2012, until Hillary Clinton took them off. But it was a terrorist, an organization regarded to be a terrorist organization. And it's very clear that, if they were the originators or if they only jumped on the bandwagon, in any case, now the British, Saudi Arabia, and unfortunately a large part of the Trump administration, including Trump himself, have encouraged these unrests. I think this is very dangerous because, if you have, for example, civil war in Iran, or just a destabilization, another Syria in Iran. I mean, nobody can wish that, because on the other side, if the new Silk Road is extended from China to Iran, which is already on the way, then it can be extended to Iraq, to Syria, to Egypt, to Turkey, to Europe, to Africa. I mean, it's really the question: Rouhani received President Xi Jinping 2 years ago, or it's almost 3 years ago, and they agreed that the new Silk Road Belt and Road Initiative should be basically extended to Iran and beyond. So I think that this is a very dangerous development, because if you have a destabilization, the whole Iran deal could go out of the window. You would be back in the question of building nuclear weapons, and this is really the most dangerous spot in my view right now. So people should really not fan the flames, because I mean, this is just a continuation of the previous British-Saudi policies. When it was clear that ISIS was defeated in Syria and in Iraq, and there are offers now to extend the Silk Road into Afghanistan. I mean, it's really the question: can the development be peaceful? These countries be reconstructed, or are there geopolitical forces at work who try to prevent exactly that? And I think that people should really help to reconstruct the Middle East, because these people have suffered so much from wars which were based on lies. Just think how many millions of people have lost their life, how many misery has been going on. Look at what's happening in Yemen right now, the worst genocide. 7 million people are in acute danger to lose their life. I mean, the world community must become adult and stop these games. And that is why I said in my New Year's greetings that, from all the many things which have to be straightened out, geopolitics must stop. Geopolitics in the time of thermonuclear weapons cannot be a way to conduct policy. And Xi Jinping has established a new paradigm with the idea of a joint, shared community for the shared future of mankind, a community of destiny. And by doing that, he has established a higher level of relations among countries, which is not based on geopolitics. And I think people have to think that through, because people in the West are so accustomed to think that policy is a zero-sum game. One wins, the other one loses. That you cannot have a world where everybody cooperates to the benefit of everybody. But that is exactly the debate which we have to have. And since the new Silk Road is such a strong dynamic, I think it can be realized. It just needs to be discussed. We have to have a political discourse about these questions, and show a willingness to move to a new era of civilization.
And one of the areas that we see as a bright spot for this win-win policy is Africa, where some of these projects are now coming online. You told me earlier that there's now an agreement for Japan to work with China in Africa. What's your perspective on what we can expect in the next period with this cooperation in Africa?
I think this is one of the most interesting things, because Japan has not only expressed an absolute willingness to cooperate with the Belt and Road Initiative, with the AIIB in a bilateral relation between China and Japan, but Japan has really offered for the first time to cooperate with China in the development of 4 major projects in Africa. Now, this is exactly what the new Silk Road spirit can bring about, that you not just have bilateral relations in a win-win cooperation, but that countries which have major industrial capacities, like China and Japan, that they can unite for the benefit of third countries, or in that case, even the continent, and help to overcome the underdevelopment. And that is what the United States should join in, and we are appealing to the Europeans that they should also. I mean, right now, there are many countries in Europe who are getting on board, but some others are not. Very interesting in this context will be the visit of Macron to China on the 8th of January. The French economic minister, Le Maire, just gave an interview where he said the intention of Macron is to build an economic backbone from Paris to Moscow to Beijing. And if that would be the outcome of Macron's visit, then you have Eastern Europe, Central Europe, the Balkans, Southern Europe, and France moving in this direction, and that would make the position of Brussels and the non-existing government in Berlin very isolated. And I have been saying the whole time, whoever is not getting on board of this new paradigm will be sidelined by history and at a great peril for the respective populations. So I think, there is, as I said, the solutions are so much inside. And therefore, there is a tremendous reason to be optimistic that this year, 2018, can become a very, very positive change in the history of mankind, where we leave these geopolitical confrontations behind us and, have a concert of nations working for the common good. And, I know many people think this is completely idealistic and not realistic, but look what China is doing. China is going global. I mean, there is a new spirit which was expressed at the Belt and Road Forum last May by Xi Jinping and others. It was reiterated at the 19th National Congress of the CPC in October. It was expressed by Xi Jinping and Wang Yi and others at the New Year's speeches. And China is now moving with an incredible speed to go global. And it's happening on all levels. And there is no reason to feel threatened by it, because if countries like Germany or the United States would go back to their best traditions, like the United States going back to the Kennedy Apollo idea, or going back to the New Deal of Roosevelt, there is nothing which the United States and China cannot do together, or Germany and China and other countries working together. I mean, people have to change the thinking. It's not a zero-sum game. It's the idea, can we define goals for humanity? Can we do what was discussed in the Federalist Papers already in the Young America? Can we find a self-rule which is for the long-term survivability of our society? And I think we can. I think the human species is, capable of reason. I think we are even capable of love. And, people think love has nothing to do with politics, but that's not true. The outcome of the 30 Years' War was a terrible destruction in Europe, but out of that came the Peace of Westphalia. And if you look at the principles of the Peace of Westphalia, the 2 most important features were, for the sake of peace, forget every evil which was done by the one or the other side and concentrate on joint development. And the second principle was, for the sake of peace, foreign policy from now on has to be based on the interest of the other and love. And I think that that is what China is doing. It's consistent with the idea of a harmonious development of all nations. And that was the policy of John Quincy Adams. So it's not alien to American history. And, you know, it was also associated with humanism in Europe, with the idea of Leibniz, of Cusanus, of, you know, many other great people who were thinking in terms of development as the goal of history. So we are at a crucial change of the era, you know, where we have to leave the era of geopolitics behind us and move to a new, completely new phase in the history of civilization.
Well, Helga, I think you just summarized very beautifully why we can be optimistic as we approach this year, but optimism alone won't do it. We have to be active. And I would call on all of our listeners and supporters to make sure that this is the year that you become members of the Schiller Institute and become active with us so that we can ensure that these policy solutions will be implemented. So Helga, until next week, thank you very much, and we'll see you then.
Okay, bye-bye.